Hi, I'm Mike Naraki. I am the director of Sweetpea Beauty and Snoodlerella, also the writer of Snoodlerella.
And I'm Joe Spatterford. I was the concept artist on this show, in charge of designing the look of the show. So, welcome to the art gallery, and we just want to take the time to show you how we made this film.
Okay, well, this is sort of a sequel to a show we did a number of years ago called A Snoodle's Tale. This is the girl version of A Snoodle's Tale with Snooderella. So we start off in Snoodleburg, and then we travel to the new world of Snoostein. We wanted to kind of do a Bavarian sort of feel, and of course the iconic Bavarian castle is Neuschwanstein, which is just south of Munich, which I got to go to a couple years ago, by the way. So cool.
One of the first pieces I worked on was the Valley of Goot, and I really wanted to get some whimsical mountains and everything. And I looked at my old Dr. Seuss books, and I looked at just a lot of people who've tried to do the same thing and tried to fit even the Bavarian buildings into that style that looked very, very similar to Snoodleville. Even when you look inside the houses and everything, the boards are all warped and bendy and everything. Just wanted to give everything the feeling of that curviness. You know, when you look at the towers of the castle, they're all curvy and, so we just try to keep it really informal and also very bright and lighthearted. That's kind of what the original Snoodle film looked like, but also have those nice dramatic, sweet moments that the story of Cinderella actually calls.
With the VeggieTales episodes, typically we'll use a bunch of our old cast and we'll recostume them, and then every once in a while we'll add a new character. But this one was, everybody was new, and so with the exception of Bob. Bob made a cameo as the Snoodle coach driver.
Yeah, once you get into the groove, it's pretty easy to figure out what a Snoodle is. But we did do one thing that was a little different than the last show, and we figured since you're going to a different town, it is a little different. We did remove some of the backpacks that were in the original Snoodle show. But, we're in a different part of the land now. So, it seemed to be okay to just have just the wings coming outside the back.
They're ethnically different Snoodles, these. They're backpackless. Yes,
that's right.
Oh, and here is Snooderella's transformation. And she goes, when her Berry godmother comes along with her ducks and does her makeover, she goes through a transformation, and so these are some stages along the way as she's trying on different dresses as she's still in curlers. This is before her big reveal, from her makeup. The ducks were so cute in Pistachio, Gelato's little ducklings, that of course Cinderella has the whole thing with the woodland animals coming and helping her get dressed for the fancy dress ball. And so we had our own little woodland animals already, so we decided just to bring back the ducks as fashionistas to help out the Berry godmother. So Joe just took them and just to differentiate them a bit, put them in different color berets and scarves.
Yes, I tried to make them look like they were very sophisticated New York, deep Manhattan fashionistas, and they knew what was what.
The spa in a box. This actually, kind of became its own character. It's so fun. Berry godmother brings it in a little briefcase and unfolds it, and then this thing just comes shooting out, and kind of automatically gives Snooderella her makeover and her transition. So it turned out to be a really fun contraption. It's a really fun design. I think both Joe and Todd Carter worked on this because Joe did an initial draft of it, and then Todd, as he was working on the storyboards for the purposes of story and what needed to happen, he added his own design to it to have it turn out what it ended up like in the end. But it was really, really fun.
This is actually one of my favorite props in the whole show, mostly because I was able to take a vehicle and make it look like it fit in the show by shaping it like it was the silhouette of a Snoodle. I called my buddy Todd up. I said, "I'm terrible with horses, man. You got any ideas?" And he just he whipped a little rough sketch out in like 12 seconds, and I got it back, and I just revised it slightly, and voila! And I think it's a showstopper. To me, it's one of those props I'll probably always look back at and go, you know what, that was a good one.
Here, we wanted to set it up in sort of a typical fairy tale land. and really kind of go back and revisit other fairy tales that we had done with VeggieTales. And so here, folks that are familiar with King George and the Ducky may recognize the castle, also inspired by Neuschwanstein, typical fairy tale castle. So that the exterior of the castle, and then also the interior Queen's chambers are right from King George and the Ducky. And then the hallway leading into her chambers is from Sherlock Holmes when we were in Buckingham Palace. And then there's some brand new stuff. There's some slightly modified stuff for the fairgrounds in front of the castle, and then the backyard of the castle is all new. One of the reuses is from Pistachio. It's Gelato's workshop, previously modified from Boo Booville, from Abe and the Amazing Promise. And then the river scene was from Wizard of Oz. There's a little bit of Wizard of Oz in there and a little bit of Lord of the Beans.
There was an artist named Maxfield Parrish who I referenced a lot when he does a lot of stuff with like really nice cool colors in front of or behind really warm colors, and it looks very much like a storybook, and and it seemed to work in this.
Here's our hero, Sweetpea Beauty.
And Tim Hodge actually did quite a bit of work on this. Tim did the original Blue Sky work for this, and it really set the tone for what a lot of the characters' costumes would look like. And that would span into just about all the major characters.
Queen Blueberry, she's great. I mean, Madame Blueberry is one of my favorite characters in the VeggieTales cast. And, just being able to use her again as sort of the weepy, insecure queen, it reminded me very much of the character that she played in Madame Blueberry when she originally came into the cast.
And this was actually when she looks into the mirror, she is expecting like herself to look like how she looks on the left, which is just like, oh, stunning, beautiful, big hair, big sweeping curls. And then all of a sudden she starts disintegrating, and then she gets a unibrow, and then she falls off, and then she got tufts of hair. Mike's direction to me on this one was just make her look as silly as you possibly can. And I did this almost as a joke, and Mike goes, I like that.
Prince Larry. This is just a nice little Renaissance-y Larry. So, Joe, you did a great job on just putting Larry in red felt.
Red felt is a key to Renaissance, kids. It was originally when I originally saw Tim's work, I just pushed it a bit further, and was remembering a little bit of Duke and the Great Pie War, some cues I took from that, but then I also wanted to make it something that it was still its own. So and Larry looks great in red.
Yeah, he's very Christmassy, isn't he? Mm-hmm. Red and ooh, I forgot that we had that fiery version of the mirror. He doesn't show up quite so fiery in the show. He's the bad guy of the show. Just sort of reflective of the vice of vanity. And I said reflective. I think that was some sort of a Freudian thing.
And the challenge in designing it was that he had all these little compartments that would come out of his sides and everything. And I actually found a mirror that had these little side compartments. And then another big problem that we had, originally in the script, we had a design that looked great on paper, which was like teeth on the top and on the bottom. But I was talking to Mike. I said, well, he's always going to look like he's screaming if we do something like this. And so Mike had a good idea about putting the VeggieTale mouth just kind of right on the mirror itself, and and almost free floating, magically, and I was just like, well, that's a really good choice. So, don't mess with what works.
Ah, yes, this is Minstrel Dave, and the whole show is, narrated through song at times by Minstrel Dave and Minstrel Pete. So it's just another fun little Renaissance costume that Joe came up with here. Yeah,
it's always fun to get a character who's got a funny hat when you do a VeggieTales show. So, and in the Renaissance, you don't have to stretch it too far because everybody's hats were pretty funny back then. So
these are the 7 snow peas. And really all we did with this one is we took Jean-Claude and Philippe, which are exactly the same anyway. We just made six of them, and then, gave them, revoiced a couple extra guys. And then the only one that's different is the 7th pea, which is Unbrilliant. And he's just a bit bigger because he can fit an acorn in his belly button, so he has to be a little bit bigger.
Yeah, and one of the conversation points, my original drawings looked a lot like garden gnomes, and we kind of pulled them back so that there's some similarities, but in the end they had their own personality to themselves, because basically what we were going for was more of like, it's kind of like a fractured fairy tale, in the sense where we wanted the designs to be almost making fun of what fairy tales are like, in the same way that Shrek and all those other films, Ellen Enchanted and other films like that do.
Oh yeah, this is a fun prop. The queen in her vanity is always looking for bigger and better, and so when the movie opens up, she is, being fit for a spectacular headpiece, and it's so big and so heavy that it has to be hoisted up by a lift.
The trick in designing something like this is, and the hardest thing about sometimes being a concept artist, is when you see a prop like this, it seems like it's really easy, and especially when you see it on paper. But you actually have to figure it out almost like you were engineering it, So this thing has to actually work. You can't do a lot of cheats. And so you had to actually figure out, okay, if I was building this, how would this actually work? And that's kind of tricky.
And it's the big difference between 3D computer animation and 2D animation, because, Joe's artwork is actually, then it goes right to modelers who have to construct this in virtual space. And so you're right when you say it needs to actually work, because if you do cheat your lines and you go all Escher with it, it becomes impossible to build. So you really do have to, think of it almost as a kind of a schematic or an architectural.
Every time I read one of Mike's scripts, there's always little woodland creatures or little extra creatures, and I always think they're great, and somehow they always get cut. And I remember
They're
this.
Just harder to animate.
Yeah, well, and I remember this for like Mo and the Big Eggs. There was all these great little like gags with woodland creatures or creatures that would live on the Nile and everything, crocodiles and everything. I remember reading this opening scene going, wow, this is fantastic, but there's no way they're going to let him do it all. And they didn't. And I was just kind of shucks about it. But I was really happy to see that this time around we got to see some woodland creatures, and Tim Hodge actually did the designs for these guys.
Just a fun, of course you can't have a fairy tale without woodland creatures, and we did put the ducks in Snooderella, but Mark Steele actually wrote this script, so I want to point that out. But and it initially had a lot more woodland creatures, but we really did have to call them back. And we also had a porcupine. We brought the porcupine in from Jonah, and one of the interesting things there was, originally the porcupine was going to be the one that kind of came to Sweetpea. He was Gaspard. The porcupine was going to come to the rescue of Sweetpea at the end. But that just turned into the character itself, because it was so old. It just wasn't very animatable. And so when the crew built the skunk, he was rigged really nicely and flowed really well. And so we swapped the characters. So now the porcupine hardly shows up at all. He's in the opening song with Sweetpea. But after that, he just goes away, and we just spend the rest of the time with the skunk. And it just turned out to be a really super cute little character. Thank you for joining us for the Art Gallery. I'm Mike Naraki.
And I'm Joe Spatterford.
Join us next time on the Art Gallery. For the next show.